everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus. And together, we are the Minimalists.
We're here in the studio with Malabama.
Hi, everybody.
And guess who's back? TK Coleman.
What it is.
Welcome back.
We got the rest of our team here in the studio as well. And coming up today on this free public minimal episode, we're talking to a couple of listeners about perfectionism. We're joined by a guest expert. We'll introduce her in a moment. We also have an outstanding lightning round segment, a live stream question, and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 381, where we answer 4 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free because, say it with me, y'all, advertisements suck. Our first question today is from YouTube.
Cymbeline asks, my perfectionism gets in the way of my projects at work. Even with 20 years of experience and a PhD, I agonize, delay, and self-sabotage. I'm perfectly qualified to do my job, so why is it so hard for me to sit down and do the work?
Well, we're joined in the studio today by Catherine Morgan Schaffler. She's the author of this new book, if you're watching the video version of the podcast. It is called The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control. Now, Catherine, before we answer this question directly, I want to say I first misread the title, and this is my own imperfections, my own perfectionism. I read it as The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Everything. But isn't it a Freudian slip, sort of? Because to a perfectionist, control is all that I have, and I need more of it, and I would be satisfied if only I could get more control. If I had more dominion over my domain, I would be happier, I'd be more complete. It's like psychological consumerism in a way. I'm going to complete myself if I just had more control. And of course, what happens? I get some control and I just need more. It becomes this unquenchable thirst.
Yeah. I mean, that's how you get stuck in the game, because there's intermittent reward. And when you think about how you cannot control so much, and I would say most things in life, you can control some stuff some of the time. And when you control something and manipulate in such a way that you get the outcome you want, it's like ding, ding, ding. And then you want to play more and get to the next level and do all of this stuff. And of course, to your point, it's all an illusion. And the subtitle of the book, A Path to Peace and Power, is about control is just this generic cardboard cutout version of power.
Yes.
We don't actually want control. What we want is power. And power is always the upgrade. It's always available to everybody. It's coming from within yourself. It doesn't need to be externally sourced. Whereas control is like the opposite in so many ways. But it's like lust and love. They look so similar. And it's really hard to tell the difference.
Wait, please tell. I got to hear her definition of power. Like, what is power?
Power is understanding the immutability of your worth.
Ooh.
That's how I define power. People who are powerful know that there is not one thing that you can do or not do that would change the fact that all the time, even when you're sleeping, even when you are completely messing up whatever you're trying to do, you are still worthy of all the love, joy, connection, freedom, and dignity that, like, if you imagine the most accomplished, ideal version of yourself, that person and you right now are equally worthy of those things.
Perfectionism, or perfection is maybe a better way to look at this, is sort of the default state of the universe. And we try to attain it thinking that I can become more perfect.
Yeah.
That's even in the founding documents of this country, like a more perfect union, as though I can become perfect and then I can then make it more perfect. Perfection isn't attained, it is uncovered in a way by understanding the acceptance thing you were talking about. Now, Catherine, you're a psychotherapist, and in the book, you talk about the 5 types of perfectionists. And I thought this was ideal to answer Cymbeline's question here, because she is a perfectionist at work. And she says, even I have 20 years of experience. I have a PhD, but I still agonize every day. I delay. I self-sabotage. What type of perfectionist is this?
Okay, well, here's the thing, just to lay the lay of the land, is that something that bothers me and has always bothered me about addressing perfectionism and perfectionists is that the general message in the self-help / personal development world is like, just don't be a perfectionist. Just be less of a perfectionist. Just like, don't sweat the small stuff and lower your standards a little bit. And that doesn't work. It's like telling someone who's really pissed off to calm down. Like, it makes
Works every time.
I am calm. Relax.
Oh, shoot.
Right. And it not only doesn't work, but it actually makes perfectionists feel really isolated because it's immediately like, oh, you don't get it. I can't just shut this off. Right. So this question, the thing I'm hearing before I hear anything else, it's like, I can't turn this off. I haven't been able to turn this off for 20 years, probably before 20 years. And so this book is about completely flipping the way that we think about perfectionism and perfectionists. And first understanding that if you're a perfectionist, that's a big core part of your identity. It's like being a romantic or being an activist. It's not something you can necessarily edit out of yourself. And so the book takes an integration approach instead of the eradication approach, which is like, just don't be a perfectionist. In the same way that romantics can have a lot of problems if they don't have boundaries around the way they love or their impulsivity or whatever else is going on. That doesn't mean that being a romantic is unhealthy. It just means you need to be really self-aware, understand your triggers, like recognize some patterns, how you want to switch them up, the patterns that you want to keep and maintain. And perfectionism, I see as the same thing. It's not a bad thing. You don't have to stop being a perfectionist to be healthy. You just have to understand where it can help you and where it can hurt you. Because it's a very powerful force, perfectionism. It's a force I think is present in everybody. But perfectionists are people who feel that impulse to actively chase the ideal more often than not. They feel it in a really reliable, consistent, patterned way. And so, long story short, it's not perfectionism that is your problem. It's how you respond to it. And it sounds like this caller is responding to it with a lot of punishment. And punishment is not powerful. It is terrible, toxic. There's no healthy version of it. Punishment will just take you down.
It's funny how punishment sometimes, like, it makes us feel better about our imperfections. Well, at least I feel guilty about it and I'm punishing myself.
Yeah.
But I love how you're relieving people of the guilt of being a perfectionist.
Yeah. And to your point, Josh, it's the first person to bring up perfectionism in psychological literature was this guy, Dr. Alfred Adler, who everybody knows because this is the guy who coined the term inferiority complex. And he was a socialist, and his ideas didn't get a lot of traction for a lot of reasons, but mostly because they didn't fit into the mold at the time, which was way back in the day, like Freud day, like 1910s. And he said that perfectionism is the eternal melody we all hear. And because he believed like people are good inside. And so if you leave people to their own devices, that striving and pushing towards the ideal that perfectionists actively feel is because we all want to be more connected. And Adler saw all neuroses as an absence of connection. And he said, if everybody was clean, clothed, safe, fed, and free, there would be no perfectionism because we would have the ideal already. But because there's not, perfectionism is always going to be here. And that's where the whole inferiority complex comes in. Like, we know at all times, we're not as connected. We're not taking care of each other. We're not. And we feel that. And there's then a compensatory drive to fix that. And if that compensatory drive is kind of more reactive than responsive, it ends up being unhealthy because you try to get like the quick fix.
Yeah.
And so that's when maladaptive perfectionism is the research term for unhealthy perfectionism. And adaptive perfectionism is when you use perfectionism to help you and heal you.
It sounds to me like what Adler was saying is sort of the opposite of what Dostoevsky talks about when he says, like, and the thing is from Notes in the Underground, he was talking about how if everyone got everything that they wanted, they became perfect, they would find a way to sabotage that in order to create an imperfection. Because it's almost as though we are these problem-solving creatures. And I think there's something about perfectionism that says, I need something to fix. I'm going around with a solution in search of a problem.
Yeah, well, you're touching on that human aspect of it. And something that surprised me when I was researching for this book and thinking about my clients is that perfectionism is compulsive. Like this person who cannot stop doing it, it is compulsive. And compulsivity is often a marker for dysfunction. If you can't control it, then something's wrong. But then I started thinking about other stuff that's compulsive, like the need to tell stories or to touch or kiss or talk even. And that it's actually not a sign of health if we just sit here and are like templates of what a human being is supposed to be. And we never kind of let I guess it's a little bit of what I would call activation anxiety to like touch the thing or talk to the person or, it's like sitting in this quiet, quote unquote, meditative state all the time. I think that's a little bit overrated, frankly.
Yeah. So let me ask you, someone who has like an unhealthy level of perfectionism in their life, would you like recommend for them to like, I don't know, first look at kind of the connection that they have in their lives? Is that a good place to start?
Yeah. I mean, a really good place to start is understanding that all people who consider themselves perfectionists are both healthy and unhealthy perfectionists. So we talk about health and mental health in particular as this kind of like flag that you can catch and then plant and you're like, I'm healthy now. And that is not how it works. And mental health is so much more fluid and so much more context dependent than we think of it as. And the reason that we think of it that way is because mental health right now is organized in these categorical models of like, I'm depressed or I'm not depressed. I'm, suffering from bipolar disorder or I'm not. And everything actually operates on a continuum. And we're all like sometimes a little bit of a narcissist or a little bit depressed-ish. And like, I like a lot of gray language in mental health, but that doesn't help when you need the label to help you understand, like, this is going to show up in this way in your life. And here's how to understand it and plan for it and kind of manage it. And in that way, labels are healthy. But in another way, they're not, because when someone is in like a healthy space, I think they feel like, well, nothing can happen to me now, or I'm not at risk of like slipping because I'm doing all the healthy stuff, you know?
Yeah. Labels are a good, guide, but I think it can be detrimental to use those labels to define who we are as a person.
100%. Yeah. And to get to your question, the two things you want to see if you really want to test where your perfectionism is at in terms of whether it's in a healthy or unhealthy space is like, how are you striving and why are you striving? And so if the how is like you're striving in a way that feels good and energizing and connective for you, then that's adaptive perfectionism. If you're striving in a way where you're just burning yourself out and you're frustrating yourself and pissing yourself off and all that stuff, that's more maladaptive. And the why are you striving is like, are you striving because you think you're going to get this thing, X amount of listeners, X amount of money, X amount on number on the scale, and that's going to certify your belonging somewhere to some club or some group, or that's going to make you feel worthy of all the stuff we talked about at the top of the conversation? Or are you striving because you love to? And it makes you feel like more of who you are. And you're not so attached to the outcome, you're obsessed with the process. And if you're striving for those reasons, then that's healthy perfectionism.
Yeah, it's almost like we we're abutting the limitations of the English language here, right?
Mhm.
Because what we're talking about is like striving versus, someone might call that a chase.
Yeah.
Someone else might call it devotion to something, right?
Yeah.
And it's the devotion side I see as being the sort of healthy obsession about something.
Mhm.
The striving for a particular outcome or chasing an outcome is a surefire path to misery.
Yeah.
Because what happens is you get it, and then you're happy for about 3 seconds.
Mhm.
And then, oh, wow, look at me. We were just talking about this morning, Mal, when we were talking about pride and how Harold Wodskin talks about how pride is essentially the fear of not being able to do something again, which I thought was a really interesting framing.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, like we were nominated for an Emmy a few years ago, and it'd be easy to feel pride for that at first, but then what's the pride saying? Oh, this is rare. I might not be able to do this again. Or the very first time I tied my shoe, I felt pride around that. I was a late shoe tire. I didn't get to, I was like 7 or 8 years old. And so I felt a lot of pride. But imagine if I walked into this studio today and I was like, you're not going to believe this, Catherine. I was able to tie my shoe all by myself this morning. Well, I don't feel that way because there's no scarcity around. There's no fear that I won't be able to do that again. I do want to touch on the 5 types of perfectionists in a moment, but let's tune in to Instagram, Malabama. We got a question from Rose.
I'm cohabitating with someone who isn't a minimalist, and I need help on developing some strategies to maintain our common spaces. I know it isn't reasonable to hold them to my high standards, but I don't want to play maid to them either. We've tried several different systems to keep clutter at bay, but it never seems to last for long. What are some tools to help me keep the peace and keep things organized?
So, Catherine, I'm interested in this question because I do suffer from perfectionism to the point where it becomes the opposite of productive. It becomes neurotic. I neurose over it, and it becomes a type of prison. And in your book, what you talk about is having boundaries around the perfectionism, because I think we were talking about this earlier to some extent, but the chase isn't going to bring happiness. And so I think the same thing is true with decluttering. Decluttering is not going to bring you peace.
Right.
It's going to set up the environment in which you've removed the chaos, and so you can be peaceful. But let's be frank about this. It's also possible to be at peace within a room, a warehouse full of clutter, even.
Right.
And so psychologically, what is going on here when you're cohabitating with someone? And of course, all of my, this is a George Carlin bit, basically. Like all of my stuff is stuff and all of your stuff is crap. And what we're doing is simply projecting our own image of the world onto someone else. You should be this way. You should behave this way. You should pacify me. You should think the same way that I do. And no wonder Rose feels miserable right now because it's heaping those expectations onto someone else. And by the way, I totally get it. I have compassion for Rose because this question, it resonates with me. I have a family, a wife and a daughter, and our house would be far more Spartanist if it was up to me. We still have a relatively minimalist home, as you can see from we do minimalist home tours over on Patreon. And yet it's still not exactly the way I would like it to be. It's not perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I'm laughing because it's such a universal struggle and particularly in this example of living with somebody and, we're so often drawn towards people who the opposite attracts thing. And so if you are a minimalist, it is interesting that I think a lot of people are drawn to someone who is the opposite in some way. And I think really breaking that down into 2 parts. One is if you can explain the undercurrent of your preferences and your perfectionistic tendencies to someone, that's going to get you a lot more mileage than saying, I really need the kitchen counter to be clear, okay? Just clear it. I want it to be clear. Why do you leave this junk here every night? If you can say, when the kitchen counter is clear, my mind is more clear. I remember more stuff about what I value. And it's like, taking a walk for me. And when you put stuff on the kitchen counter, it takes that stuff away from me. Or when you leave your clothes all over the floor, it's like you're interrupting me. So if you can kind of not make it about there's an old adage in therapy of it's never about what it's about.
Right.
It's not about the stuff in the house. It's about your access to your own feelings and your sense that your partner doesn't care about that. And if you can address that, then you're probably going to see a little more motivation on the side of your partner to be like, oh, I don't want to interrupt her. Let me clear this away. And then the second thing is, and I talk about these 6 different types of support to help you understand like which bucket you need to pick up and pour over your life. Because sometimes it's like, I need so much help. I'm so stressed. I'm overwhelmed. And just giving yourself the language of like, look, it's not that you need so much help. It's that you need financial support right now. You know what to do. You know how to do it. You've got a team around you. You just need funds. And in this case, this might be a tangible support thing, which is like having a house cleaner every week or something like that, which people sometimes don't give themselves because they underestimate how powerful that can be. And it's also, if you and your partner are paying for a house cleaner and investing, then you're less likely to keep, it's more of an intentional mission of like, this house needs to be this way for a reason. And so I would say those 2 things are good starting points to the convo.
And sometimes acting on starting points like that, like getting someone to help with the cleaning, we have this inner resistance that says, oh, but that would be pathetic of me to bring someone from the outside to do what I am perfectly able to do. And it's letting that expectation of ourselves go and saying, no, it's never pathetic of me to get the help that I need, right?
Yeah. I used to live in LA. And when I lived here, I really had it in my head that if it was in my early 20s, that if I asked for help for anything from anybody, whatever I achieved didn't count. I was cheating. So don't ask for help because then it doesn't even count if you get it. It's not even a feel good. And I remember I went through this abrupt breakup when I was 24. And the guy I was dating was such a great guy. And we were both sharing the rent and he would have been very happy to stay on the couch for a while or whatever. But I was like, I'm going to be out of this house tonight with me and my dog. I looked on Craigslist for the first available apartment that night. And I just moved all my stuff into this apartment that was, I tell this story in the book, owned by this guy named Dax. Okay. And Dax, I want everybody to know, had a license plate that said Daxtasy. This is red flags waving, billowing in the air. And I did not care because I was like, I'm doing this by myself. I could have asked 50 billion friends to just crash at their place for a little while, whatever it was. And then I lived there for a month and it was I'm laughing about it now, but Dax and his friend who also lived there were so sketchy and did a lot of drugs and drank a lot of alcohol and partied all night long. And I just felt so much pride, to your point, of I'm doing it by myself, even though I feel unsafe, even though I feel like this is not a good choice, but I'm not asking for help. And it took me so long to just get to this place where it's not only is asking for help always the move, it's the smartest and strongest people are the ones who ask for help. If you look at successful people, they have personal assistants, they have this, they have that. They've streamlined their life so that they have as much help in as many areas as possible. So it's a hard thing to take in. But once you take it in, it just allows you to have so much more access to yourself.
And this comes back to your point about worthiness, right? It's, I am worthy of this, even if I haven't suffered for it.
Yeah. The suffering is such a big one because it's I suffered. I'm miserable. See how responsible I am?
I'm worthy because I'm suffering.
Right.
Yeah. I want to circle back to one thing real quick. You mentioned the house cleaner. I have a separate problem. My perfectionism, I'm very obsessive. I OCD and to a certain extent, it becomes a superpower. And you write about this in the book. That rigidness, that structure has allowed me to create things that I don't think I could have created otherwise. The problem is when it becomes too rigid. And sometimes it's when there are too many boundaries, that is a type of non-boundary in a way because it restricts your freedom. And the opposite is also true. With no boundaries, you have no freedom.
Yeah.
Because you don't have a place in which to operate. You don't know what the rules are to your own life. I noticed when I hired a house cleaner once, they came over and she did an awesome job. In fact, she used to clean the studio here floor. And when she came to my house, and really she was just a disorganizing consultant. Because like my shelves look like, I mean, like you go to the laundry cabinet and like everything is lined up like a retail store would be. Every label is facing outward, and she just came over, and I swear she came in and just did this, Ryan. She would just like turn the label just slightly and set it back down. And so I'll move the Windex in front of the counter cleaner. And it's like, no, what are you doing?
Yeah.
This feels so out of control.
Yeah.
But the truth is that's merely a story I'm telling myself. And I wanted to circle back because in the book, you talk about the 5 types of perfectionists. Which type am I?
So that would be a classic perfectionist. So classic perfectionists are what we most think of when we think of perfectionist. Someone who might be a little rigid sometimes and likes their stuff the way they like their stuff. And they're highly reliable people. So all these types of perfectionism have their advantages and they have their liabilities. And classic perfectionists on the pros side are so structured. They do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it in the way they said they would do it, right? And so they're very disciplined in that way. On the con side, sometimes their style of perfectionism doesn't lend itself to accepting help because it's like, well, if I'm the classic perfectionist line in their heads is like, if you want something done well, do it yourself.
Yes.
And then it's like, but you can't do all the things yourself.
It's a subtitle to my memoir.
Put the Windex back. And then that's the subtitle. So there's the classic perfectionist, right? There's the procrastinator perfectionist. And this perfectionist essentially wants the conditions to be perfect before they start, which never happens.
Right.
And so on the pros side, these are really thoughtful people. These are people who can prepare. They are not impulsive, which is such a strength. And they can see everything from a 360-degree angle. But on the con side, obviously, this kind of perfectionism turns into paralysis and indecision and a lot of self-loathing because you're like, why can't I just start the books, do this, do that. And the counterpart to the procrastinated perfectionist is the messy perfectionist. And these are people who are in love with starting. They are obsessed with starting. They don't want to do anything but start projects, right? They're just like, cast this huge net. I'm going to have this podcast and write this book and also be an Airbnb superhost and also do this and that and whatever. And they really hit a wall when the middle of the process, like when the perfection and romanticized part of starting something starts to break down. So these are people who love like the first, second date. And then on the third date, they hear there's a little bit of a glitch. And they're like, oh, I'm out, I'm done. You know, if you're not managing that kind of perfectionism. And then there is the Parisian perfectionist. And this perfectionism is really interesting because it plays out interpersonally. So this is about wanting people to perfectly like you, perfectly understand you, and also wanting to perfectly like other people. And so the ideal that's being chased here is ideal connection. And these people also want to perfectly understand themselves or their God, whatever it is. So a Parisian perfectionist could be at like a regular 9 to 5, no upward mobility. You're not seeing their perfectionism expressed professionally necessarily or in like classic perfectionist organizational ways. It all comes through interpersonally. And then there's the intense perfectionist. And this is like what we think of the public persona of Gordon Ramsay or Steve Jobs. And intense perfectionists are really razor sharp focus on the outcome, the ending of a process being perfect. And that's a great advantage. They're effortlessly direct. You know, they're not trying to do anything but get the job done. And if you're not managing that perfectionism, you can get to the goal and just leave like a trail of devastation. And it's like, great, you got the thing, you got the goal. Everybody's going to quit next month because they're all miserable. You know, this is like, great, Christmas and everything is decorated perfectly and everybody's here and dinner is hot and on time. And like, do you see how disconnected everybody is at the table? Like, and so all these kinds of perfectionisms can play out in positive ways, negative ways, and a lot in between.
Ryan, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer your questions from TikTok.
Yes, indeed. You can follow The Minimalists on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Minimalists. During the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your questions with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We call them minimal maxims, and we put these minimal maxims in the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast. So you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you like. Looks like our question today is from Dr. Wright.
If you guys don't run ads, how do you make money?
What an interesting question, because there's so many things that this question presupposes. And since Ryan and I have similar minimal maxims, I didn't share mine with him beforehand. I'll let him start today.
Oh, thanks.
Let's give him 60 seconds, Professor Sean.
All right. Am I going? Oh, I'm already 1 second into it. All right, here we go. When you add value, people are eager to support your work. So often family members, friends, listeners, they're like, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to do what you do. Tell me, how can I make a living from my passion? And my response is never like, well, here's the 10 best ways to make money from your passion. What I tell them is, hey, look, if you're really passionate about something, then go ahead and do it. And what happens is when you fulfill that passion and work comes out of it and it's adding value to other people's lives, those people are going to go way out of their way to support you to make sure that you can still continue producing your work. And there is no one specific way. There are many ways to make money from your passion. And the ways that Josh and I make money is very different than how TK makes his money, and so on and so forth. So cultivate your passion. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, what's fascinating about what you're saying here is there will be people who support your work, right? But not everyone will. And I think that's where we really get caught up, is we think that like, oh, I have to do something where everyone will support me. But then it goes back to the idea of the Kevin Kelly 1,000 true fans thing. Like, you only need 1,000 true fans, or some artists need 12 true fans, and they will have a very abundant, wealthy life with those 12 true fans, or 100 true fans, or 1,000 true fans. But TK, this question, let's give you 60 seconds here in a moment, but this question, it almost presupposes that like it's binary. Either you're not going to make money, or you are going to make money, but you have to do advertisements. And of course, on the private podcast, every week we have the advertisements suck segment. In fact, I'm calling someone out this week specifically. And so we'll get into that. But this presupposing that you must do something also limits our creativity in a way. Professor Sean, let's give TK Coleman 60 seconds on the clock.
So I can ignore it anyway.
You're 3 seconds in, TK.
For most of human history, people earned money without a single advertisement. Now, I don't mean that people made money without getting the word out there. That's a part of making a living, right? You spread the word about the problems you can solve, about the services you can provide, and so on. What I'm talking about here are those artifacts that fill up these empty vacuums, these territories that we call ad space, right? Like the billboard. Can I put a sticker on your t-shirt? Can I put something on your car? Can I put this banner on your video? Can I interrupt your movie with the commercial? Ad space, those advertisements. Yeah, people make money with that. It's a legitimate way to make money. But for most of human history, people simply made money by creating value, satisfying the hell out of their customers, taking care of people so well that they went out and told other people about how awesome this service was. And that's what we do with a number of things that we do. We don't make our money by saying you can buy our bodies in exchange for a paycheck.
That's beautiful. I'll say this. We are also not allergic to money. And so when we say advertisements suck, we're not saying, well, I hate money. I think money is evil and bad and immoral. What I'm saying is I have a preference here. And it's funny, this question doesn't get asked of like Radiohead. No one goes up to Tom York and says, hey, if you don't put your music in commercials, how do you make any money?
Right.
Right? Because the music that he makes and his band makes is not about money.
Right.
The music is a creative act. And if it adds value, as Ryan said, then people are willing to support it. And if it doesn't add value, then people aren't going to support it. So give me 60 seconds. I'm just going to riff on what Ryan said here. Money is a byproduct of adding value. Quite often, we go the other way around. I'm going to find a way to make money and then hope that it adds value. But there is no money being earned without adding value. Yes, you can steal money from someone. You can run into a bank and take their money. You can scam someone and not add value and get their money. But if you want to earn a living, if you want to earn an income, well, you're going to have to earn it by adding value. And so the question I have is, who are you adding value to? Are you going to add value to the advertisers, or are you adding value to your audience? Because if you're adding value to the advertisers, now all of a sudden your audience is the product. And that is the reason we don't do advertisements on the Minimalist podcast.
Wow.
I love, by the way, you emphasizing earning, because every time I have ever stated the economic observation that money is a reward for creating value, I have people who inform me that criminals exist and that there are some people who make money without adding value. And so I love the way you languaged that to just sort of circumvent that objection and make that part clear.
TK was writing it down. He's like, okay, robbing a bank. Yes. Scamming. What else was there?
We're going to check in with the Patreon live stream here in a moment. But first, real quick, for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the Minimalists. Ryan and I, and for about a third of them, TK, we went on a tour last year. It was called the Love People Use Things Tour. There were 20 different events. All of them were recorded thanks to our good friend Jordan No More over there, and Danny. Danny came along to, I think, 3 of the events. The 3 best events.
That's right.
We try to pit them against each other. Is it working? No, they did an outstanding job. Podcast Sean was with us as well. We did 20 different cities throughout North America, and you can find all 20 events right now. theminimalists.com/previous. We don't have any intention on going on tour anytime soon. That was our 10th tour in 12 years. You can find all of the recordings there. theminimalists.com/previous. That'll take you to the Patreon page, and you can watch each of those. Speaking of live events, though, it looks like there are fewer than, I think, 25 tickets right now for the next Sunday Symposium, which is March 26th, Sunday at noon. If you're in LA, or if you want to come to LA, we had quite a few people. We had someone from Germany at the last one, a few people from Mexico, at least one person from Canada, and my favorite foreign country, someone came from Texas.
It's funny because they're different.
That Texan was actually Danny. So Danny Unknown here, standing over there like a sentinel, watching guard over the podcast and over our TikToks. You can see us. We'll be March 26th, Sunday Symposium in Los Angeles, downtown LA, sundaysymposium.com. Only a few tickets left to that.
Yeah.
Let's check in with the Patreon live stream, Alabama. What do you got for us?
We have a question here from David. He says, is there a difference between procrastination and resistance? I've seen this mentioned in Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art and notice a lot of people talking about them like they're the same thing.
I think quite often those two words are used interchangeably. I will say this: resistance is a beacon that illuminates meaningful pursuits. So every morning, this morning at 4 a.m., I got into the ice bath and there's resistance before I got in. And by the way, I feel this resistance every single time. But I know that I'm going to be pleased with myself. That I'm going to be glad after that experience at the end of it, right? Quite often with procrastination, I think the opposite happens. I don't know if I'm going to be appreciative of this outcome. I don't know if this is the thing I want to do. Resistance says every morning when I sit down to write, there's something that would be way easier than this. Scrolling Instagram and double tapping again and again and again is much easier than sitting down and writing. But it's not a meaningful pursuit for me. It's not going to give me the actual reward. It'll give me a little bit of dopamine, but the reward will not be there at the end of it. And I think that's the difference between resistance and procrastination.
Yeah, I see procrastination as one of many manifestations of resistance. I see resistance as just like anything that directs my focus away from being committed to what I love, to what brings me joy. And so resistance can take the form of just flat out quitting, flat out giving up, giving in to the fear. It can take many different forms. Whatever it takes, that's how Stephen Pressfield describes it. Whatever it takes to get you to not move in the direction of your life's calling, that's resistance. It'll tell you whatever it takes. Whereas procrastination is kind of like this sense that if I put it off, if I don't do it now, maybe the future will bring me a moment where it just feels easier. It feels easier to confront my fears and face the risk. And that's a very interesting and unique particular form of resistance. But resistance is broader than that. But procrastination is one form.
Yeah. I dig it.
We'll check back in with the Patreon live stream later in the private podcast. But first, from Alabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I currently live in the Bay Area. Every first week of December, with clutter, my children go through all of their toys, and we wash them, we clean them, we put them in cute little bags, and then we donate them to centers around our community. And they love acting like Santa and sharing their toys and stuff. And it gives us kind of that pre-Christmas splurge period. Also, we live in an RV full time, and so having that limited a space has definitely helped us with the grandparents and that kind of stuff. They give us more experiences than stuff since they know we just physically don't have room.
All right, that's our minimal episode for today. We'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 381, which includes answers to a bunch more questions for Catherine and the Minimalists. Also a new obsolete objects segment involving a $7,000 storage locker. An outstanding added value segment. Here's a hint. I bought 24 of them.
Minimalist.
And we got much, much more of less. And if you want to hear all that, check out the Minimalist private podcast at patreon.com/theminimalist, or click the link in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also gain access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. And if you're still on the fence, here's a testimonial from one of our lovely Patreon supporters. Patrick says, "Hi, new patron from Croatia here. After 10 years of following you on all platforms," it's a bit excessive, "I finally pulled the plug and became a private podcast listener today. After hearing just one private episode, I can say that this is one of the best decisions I've ever made."
Wow.
Patrick, we're going to have to send you an invoice for the last 10 years. No, we really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for joining the private podcast. And I will tell you this, if you're listening to this and you're on the fence, try it out for a month. What you'll get there is a deep dive, not just into letting go of your stuff, but mental clutter, relationship clutter, psychological clutter is what we talked about a lot today. So many other forms of clutter that manifest in our lives, and developing a better understanding of those. Our private podcast is the place where Ryan and TK and Mallory and I have the opportunity to talk about things that we don't typically talk about in public. And we do so in these long-form conversations with all of these different segments, and we address some things that, well, they need to be addressed. Big thanks to Catherine Morgan Schaffler for joining us today. You can check out her brand new book. It's called The Perfectionist's Guide to Losing Control. We'll put a link to that in the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast. You can also find her website and her Instagram if you'd like to follow along as well. And if you leave here today with just one message, please let it be this: love people and use things. Because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing you think that you need. Every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.